had a lot of amazing works written for me for viola, and your piece is definitely one of my very favorite, and I think one of the most skilled pieces.
Hi everyone, this is Patrick O'Malley, and I'm here with Brett Dubner, who is our soloist on our album, The Horizons, for the viola concerto, The Horizons, as well as the soliloquy, the solo piece, which it was actually Brett's suggestion to include that on the album as a sort of palate cleanser, a little encore between the first half concerto and then the two weirder orchestra pieces,
which I love.
The second half. Yes,
I love those pieces too.
No,
it's a great album.
I think I played around with the order of the tracks. I knew the viola concerto had to go first, but yeah, I'm happy with where you get the concerto, which is this big kind of all-encompassing piece, and then if you give the encore, then you have the weird, intense orchestral piece, and then you have the more kind of laid back, but then also kind of more traditionally triumphant, with a sort of ambiguous ending at the end. So you want to, I guess, talk about how the concerto got started?
Well, I remember discovering your music when you were one of the Cohn Institute Fellows at Princeton. That's where the New Jersey Symphony features anywhere from 4 to 5 really up-and-coming, talented composers on a piece. Each of them get a piece. And your piece was Rest and Restless, I think. And I really was very taken by the piece. The whole orchestra said, wow, that's a good piece. But I went up to you, and I remember saying I really like the piece. And then I was doing a Daniel Pearce concerto with Andrew Constantine in Reading, was it? Or was it
we were
Fort
on
Wayne?
The one we were on together was in Fort Wayne.
It was in Fort Wayne, yeah.
No, that was just pure coincidence.
That's true. So this was meant to be, because that I had a chance to hear it again, not playing it,
right?
Which is a different set of ears. It's like, this is really a good piece.
Well, thank you.
And so I think I said, dude, we've got to have lunch.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. I mean, we had to delay with COVID lockdowns and all that, but
it percolated then.
Yeah. So I wrote Brett the solo piece, the soliloquy.
Yeah.
The original version was like 2020, and then I changed a few things a year later.
I think you rescored a 3-movement clarinet piece, or I did a 3-movement O'Malley piece for a Paris festival where no one went to Paris.
Right.
Because we're all in COVID.
It was a virtual concert.
Right.
And I have a piece called Outlines.
Right.
Which was originally written for oboe.
Oboe, right.
And it's been transcribed for
a few
flute, clarinet, saxophone, bassoon, viola, violin, and cello.
Yeah.
You can buy any version of the piece.
And that piece I really enjoyed working on.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of, I think we had already gotten the ball rolling with the concerto, but this was kind of like just reinforcement, like, yes, this was a really good idea. Because I liked Outlines a lot.
And and I remember both you and Andrew Constantine, who's our conductor on the album, giving me pretty nice free range to do whatever I kind of wanted, though I did get vibes from Andrew and the Fort Wayne Philharmonic general manager of we trust you, but maybe not like a dirge for viola and orchestra. No, not the typical sort of very dark type of piece, and which was fine with me because I wasn't even thinking that route. My style recently has been, generally speaking, more interested in incorporating hopeful or joyous emotions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Horizons, even though Horizon suggests something in the future that you're not there yet at, so perhaps that means longing.
Right.
But your music, even the soliloquy, always comes off as sunny to me.
Great.
And I think that's one of the first things about your music that I really that resonated with me was the palette you use in Rest and Restless, in the outlines.
Outlines, yeah. That was
that's got some more teeth than perhaps the orchestra pieces, because it's got a little more edge to it. The soliloquy, I think, is a lot more taking a luxurious bubble bath after you've just spent a year learning a really hard concerto. It's like, this is nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's I'm glad it's on the album then, because I think it really works. I think it works as a kind of a turning to
I think so.
The listening experience goes.
And I love what you're talking about with, of course, Fort Wayne can play anything. They're a great orchestra, and Andrew's so much fun to work with as a conductor and an interpreter and a colleague.
Yeah.
But I do like how it's not a dark concerto.
Yeah.
I think it's sunny. It's sunny, and it's got a lot of joy and a lot of challenge, but a lot of colors, a lot of sun.
Yeah. At a concert, I don't talk about the piece as being a COVID piece, but as a behind the scenes thing, I don't mind talking about how I was definitely inspired to create something that had this sense of restarting, this rejuvenation feel. That's why the first movement takes like 3 minutes to get really going with your part, and it has all these icy textures and stuff like that. It's that sense of slowly coming back to life, and then all this like kind of unrestrained energy in the scherzo, with some borderline irresponsible writing for you with the fast stuff and the high stuff. And
I'm not sure why I like that stuff so much. I guess because I'm irresponsible also. But I would, if you had to attribute a season to this piece, it's definitely a spring. Piece.
And then
after the world froze for about 3 years,
indeed,
things began to grow again, and I think it's a very uplifting statement. I think a lot of artists in all sorts of genres felt that, whether subconsciously or overtly, and how to react to life shutting down. I know for myself, it was a time of great introspection, not only for my career, but also personally, and also how to continue to work on this instrument. So recordings were a great outlet for me. So I did 4 recordings during that time. And during that whole time working on your concerto, so it was a great thing to put it together finally.
Writing music to me is always feels like a blur in hindsight. I really don't remember. My brain does not form vivid memories of me sitting down figuring everything out. That kind of just flies out. Like if I look at the piece or listen to it, I can usually tell you where the ideas come from, but the physical act and as well as the sort of initial collaboration is kind of just goes out of my brain. So I'm wondering if was there anything in the concerto that struck you as particularly I don't understand what the composer's doing. Is what is this? This is something generally something I haven't seen before, or
I mean, from a technical standpoint, it's all pretty much straight ahead writing. I particularly enjoy the harmonic.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was leading to, because I remember one thing I do remember is getting a message from you about that section, because I had notated it originally at the sounding pitches, not with the fingers.
Right. I think that's just a language.
Yeah.
That's just agreeing on the same software.
Right. That was a big learning moment for me that week, kind of redoing it and figuring out.
Would you say this was probably your biggest piece to date?
So my violin concerto is about 5 minutes longer, but it's not
orchestration-wise.
But that's only
leaner, right?
Yes, that's for a sinfonietta, one of each instrument type of group. This was for
this
full
is
orchestra.
I mean, your 2 orchestra pieces are big on the CD, but this is probably the most symphonically sized piece.
It's the whole 4 movements. This is a full orchestra, triple winds, full brass, 3 percussionists thing. So it's the biggest classical piece.
I was blown away at the fact that this was your first piece on that scale, because it didn't sound like you were in any way a first-time driver at all.
The violin concerto, I think, helped as a first big form piece. Like, what do you do with a half hour's worth of music?
Right.
But I've been listening to symphonic music,
of course,
for forever. So
and cinematic music,
and cinematic, which is even longer.
You just finished your first film score, right?
Yes, last year I scored a little horror movie that's 72 minutes worth of music. And
we're both fans of Howard and all of the Williams and all the great Herman.
So it's been bouncing around for a while. I wrote the piece basically in order, from beginning to end. One thing I felt like I wanted to do to hit that, I think the commission was technically for 25 minutes. The piece is like a minute or two longer now, but that sense of each of the movements getting progressively shorter, and kind of as a way of focusing the energy towards the end. I think I had to shorten the scherzo by a little bit, but thankfully I didn't have to take any sections out. It was just a matter of tightening things.
You asked if I had any difficulty just understanding it. No, I found it to be very, very not accessible this is easy, but the storyline was so vivid. And you think of nature and a long frost, whether it's COVID or just the composition itself. And when we're in February and March and we're just waiting for the snow to thaw, that first moment is the longest intentionally, I think, because that's the longest part of nature. And then when things sprout, they kick in quickly.
I think that actually was written during February and March of 2022.
There you go.
So that might be
I think for me that was the movement that I didn't avoid it. The others were so much more easy to sink my teeth into. That movement, there was more mystery. That was I remember having conversations with you, and it's like, so like, how do I make this work? Because it's like, it's like a C sharp for days.
And originally it was like the same C sharp. You suggested changing the octaves, and I think that was a really good idea.
Yeah, I think because I didn't know how to make enough variety out of one pitch, so perhaps it was my limitation. But I also think because of your composing, it's so color informed, and that's what I think of with the viola. I just think, well, if we could jump around on that C sharp, different ranges, I think that could make it even more vivid.
I think that was I definitely think that's what we should have done at the time. Sometimes composers do get really interested in these kind of extreme, like, I'm going to hold this one thing for a long time. Otherwise, people might not think I'm serious. But since those three C sharps are accompanied by three very different orchestral accompaniments, they build the gradual growth or
it seemed
accompaniment
organic.
With that going up the octaves was I think a good call.
I think so.
Maybe if it was like 5 minutes of just one octave C sharp, then it would achieve some sort of transcendent.
That would be a different story.
But that's not what I was going for.
Right. So I loved, and I also like how, even though it's not a short concerto, it doesn't feel long when I play it.
Great. Yeah.
And I love how all the movements technically, there's no stoppage of sound. There's never silence and then next movement. There's always bleed in, except the second to third. But even then,
there's
it really isn't.
No, there's so that ends with the big, very
bum, bum.
classical 5/1 cadence, bum bum, and the low strings hold that C while the audience may or may not
big clapping.
And
you could have a stop there, but it's nice to not.
I think that there was no question on my part about, should this be in stopped movements or should it be attacca non-stop movements? I think that one, it certainly works, and it was to me a way of, I don't know, there's something about that continuous flow of music as long as you make the different movements very clearly different, that can really emphasize the change of emotion, as opposed to, okay, we're done, everybody kind of stops listening and relaxes and coughs, and there's all that restarting. That's there's a way that works, and obviously there are gajillions of pieces that use that model, but I also find it quite interesting when you intentionally are working with one through line throughout. And 3 of the 4 movements are all based on that opening 3-note motive from the flutes anyway.
Right.
The scherzo is really the only one that abandons it for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. I think of the Bartok concerto is no stop,
right?
But the others, they're all movements, you know. And I think of one of my favorite violin concertos, the Shostakovich first concerto of the slow movement, goes into the cadenza and goes right into the last movement. Those really, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you're telling a story, and the story doesn't have stops, but they have different ideas. So it's a short story as opposed to a novel with,
Yeah.
So I think it also is a clever way to tell the story for the audience's benefit too, because it all ties together more.
Yeah.
No,
I think that's right. But the trick is to make sure that when you switch movements, it's very clear that there's a change.
One of the things I love is you're writing for the brass in this piece, because very often if you're a violist, you're concerned with balance, especially in live performance. But you're so skilled at putting everything in the score, and yet I never feel like I'm being covered.
I actually got some comments about that from some of the audience afterwards. Was how in this concerto, compared to others, perhaps the viola and the orchestra don't play together as much as in other music. And I really wasn't thinking about that completely consciously, beyond the concern for balance and the layers. I knew I wanted to write a piece where the orchestra got to do orchestral things, where everybody in the orchestra had something important to do and not simply be an accompaniment for the entire piece.
You were talking about how even though all the movements are through composed, no stops, you want to make sure that the audience understood, okay, now we're in the next movement. And I love how the first movement ends, and then all of a sudden the trumpet's like, okay, that's a new movement.
Yeah, that's
you can almost imagine everyone going like this in their chair and shuffling.
Right.
Like, okay, new movement.
So basically, the first movement is the cadenza movement, so to speak. So that's you mostly by yourself anyway, with just some comments from the orchestra. The end of the first movement, and then most of the second movement, everybody's doing loud stuff, except for the trio, the harmonic section. Yeah. And so it was just kind of automatic, where the decision was made to have the orchestra do its thing, then listen to you, then orchestra, then you. Yeah. As opposed to trying to get a loud, fun sound, but having you and the orchestra playing together all the time, in which case I'd have to tone back a lot of things.
But and even though I'm playing and they're playing, and we're not often playing together unless I'm really high, or it's lightly orchestrated, it always relates to each other, Yeah. And that's also extremely exciting. It's very much like popcorn.
It's
very exciting.
A big shouting match conversation.
Yeah. And that movement was very hard because it goes very high and very fast. So that was a lot of fun working on that, because it was a lot of calisthenics for the viola, which I really enjoyed. I like being pushed. Yeah. Technically, but it never felt like that was your point. It was always a musical goal, but it took a lot of work for me to make it sound kind of easy. And it was also fun because in the recording, the orchestra, they're very tested. It's a hard part for orchestra. Lots of the movements, the French horns go way up, and great trumpet writing and great wind writing, and of course the violins open the last movement with very challenging fast playing, and so I think it's an exciting piece all around for everyone. But, I still have to remind myself that you only graduated in 2019, because I've had a lot of amazing works written for me for viola, and your piece is definitely one of my very favorite, and I think one of the most skilled pieces. So it's really mind-boggling that you did such a masterful job at such a large scale work so early in your career.
Oh. This has been Patrick O'Malley talking to Brett. Very excited to be releasing this album, The Horizons, which comes out from Orchid Classics on June 7th, 2024, for those of you in the future. So
very excited.
So yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks.